Hello again there, folks. So I see last night in Strasbourg in France, we've had another terrorist attack with, I think it's 3 dead. Another shooting at the Christmas market. Again, once again in France. And people are asking, I saw people asking how the security forces could have allowed this to happen. Like, why weren't they on the case? How do all these terrorists keep slipping through the net in France? And I think people are sort of underestimating just how bad the situation in France is becoming now. It's becoming really bad. And according to the Wikipedia page, I mean, this bloke was on the radar as well. That's another thing to this, is that they know who these people are. And according to the Wikipedia page, the problem that the French security services are looking at is that they've got between 11 and 17,000 radicalized Muslims in France. And just to try and 11 to 17,000 potential terrorists, or at least radicalized, let's not get banned from YouTube, radicalized Muslims according to Wikipedia. Just for comparison, so you can get that, sort of wrap your head around it, that's the size of the Orc army in the Two Towers of Lord of the Rings. Saruman's army's 10,000. So if you think of that, they've got more radicalized Muslims than that image in France. And the problem is, you can't get them all. It's as simple as that. When you're dealing with these numbers, you're just not going to be able to get them all, because you have to monitor each of these, say 11,000 has to be monitored around the clock on a permanent basis. So maybe it'll work out something like 10 French cops can monitor maybe 30 Muslims or something like that. So then you can do the maths and see how this adds up. And it's just untenable. You can't do it. Basically, more people are going to die until something drastic is done. Well, and then on top of that, you've got the problem of the cost of it all. So if France had this like massively booming economy, then you can probably sort of rejigger the entire state apparatus to monitor and secure the areas and have CCTV cameras and just survey all of these people that you're importing. You could probably get away with that. But the problem then is that the Muslim population in France, well, it's in all of Europe, isn't stable. It's increasing exponentially relative to the French population. So this is why I'm going to call this video France in the Vice, because on the one hand they've got the booming Islamic population, and then on the other hand they've got dwindling resources to try and monitor them with. And I don't see how this can go on. And what's worse is that we've had in France for the last few weeks these mass riots on the streets. And when you whittle down to it, the reason why the Yellow Vests are rioting is because France is one of the most overtaxed countries in the world, definitely in Europe. And the national debt is standing at something like just under $2 trillion. And so you've got this vice, this pincer on the French people, where the demographic bite of the Muslim population is really starting to cause them pain. And that means that they're going to have to expend more and more resources trying to monitor all of these tens of thousands of people who are radicalized. But then you have the other side of it moving in, and it's that they can't pay for it all anymore. Because if you're going to have an ever expanding population of Muslims who are going to go off the deep end every now and then, they need to be kept monitored. and that costs a massive amount of money. I think Britain's got a budget for about £4 billion per year to monitor terrorism. I've got no idea what it is in France. This is just a sort of quick video, but it's going to be in the region of that or even more. And even in Britain, we still get terrorist attacks as well. But the money's drying up even to monitor the terrorists are in the country. So if they're failing to do that now, what happens if you chuck it? What happens when they've got to control or monitor 20,000 potential terrorists in France? If they can't manage it now on the resources that they've got now, there's no more resources coming because there's no more money. And so then what you're going to have is more Muslims but less money to throw at the security services to curtail the problem. And eventually the idea that the state can keep the people safe is just going to evaporate if it hasn't done so already. I mean, at the end of the day, they still voted Macron into power last year, and not Marine Le Pen, who would have at least tried to do something. But instead, you've got Macron, who's going to, he's going to just turn up the flow of North Africans and Middle Easterners, Sub-Saharan Africans, turn it up to full blast and just flood all of Europe with it. And this is the thing. I think we're living in this sort of this illusion at the moment in Europe where people think, well, it cannot get any worse. It can. It can, and I think you're going to see this divide happening across Europe, or especially in relation to France. So a country like, say, Germany will have more resources to throw at the problem. The Germans will be able to keep their heads above water for a lot longer and reduce the amount of damage being, like, and I'm on about just raw terrorism here, not the more low-key things, like the rapes and the people being chased out of their streets and stuff. I'm just talking about the actual terrorist attacks. That a country like Germany will be able to sort of keep its head above water for longer than another countries. I mean, a country like Portugal, if they were getting hit with terrorist attacks, wouldn't be able to cope for very long at all. But in France, we've got a big one, and I think France is reaching the end of the line here. And the government are going to... So the problem they've got is that they're going to have to increase the amount of revenue they spend on policing the terrorists. But there's no end to that in sight. And I think France is reaching the breaking point. And I don't see how they can get themselves out of this at all. I don't. Not without some kind of true radical nationalist politics. And in the future of Europe, it could be that we have these two-tier countries where countries which can manage a budget will manage to keep their populations somewhat safer from terrorist attacks than countries that can't. And so Britain relatively is well, I think we've had 40 dead or something like that for the last few years in terrorist attacks. Maybe that for the government is a manageable number, but they'll think for the foreseeable future we'll be able to hold the line on it. But in the case of France, it's going to happen where the police just cannot cope anymore, and there's no more resources to be thrown at the problem. And what happens then? I don't know. I mean, some people say that this is all sort of part of a plan, where France would have to go on full lockdown, and there's been some rumours that there's been EU sort of armoured vehicles at the riots against the Yellow Vests last week. So, because France would basically collapse into some sort of anarcho state, it would just fall in on itself if it carries on like this. The other way to go would be to have where the European Union takes sort of a managerial role of all these, what would amount to a failing state in the heart of Europe. And then the budget would be infinite, but what you would get would be a sort of gigantic police state across Europe. And the people recognise this before, and the argument for that would be that you're going to have the elite would be permanently in charge. So then it wouldn't even be Macron anymore in charge. It would be an outright globalist elite, and any attempt to secure the populations of Europe would become from the top. It would be like really like just a massive Soviet-style bloc. And they would have more or less infinite resources to throw at the problem by taxing all of the populations of Europe to death, including the Germans. But yeah, but I don't really see that being a feasible option. And then you would have the richer countries who've managed to keep the terrorist problem under sort of within limits, but then so you can kind of perpetuate the illusion for a lot longer. And I would put probably Germany and maybe Britain into that. This is not to mention all the other social factors that come into it, like the grooming gangs in Britain. But what looks to me, it could be a two-tier Europe, or all of Europe coming under a sort of totalitarian superstate. And the reason they would bring that into being would be because a country like France is furthest down the line by the looks of it, just can't exist anymore as a functional state. That effectively it's dead. And now they're going to have to step in and take over, and they'll say it's for humanitarian reasons as well. Now, whether this was the plan from the start, well, I'll leave that up to others to decide. But just my thoughts on the matter.